have to admit that I used to be very intrigued by the miracles in the New Testament. I wanted to duplicate them. I wanted to be able to levitate. I wanted to be able to change the weather and all of that. When I was a teenager, I've studied people like Uri Geller, who supposedly could bend spoons with his mind, and like all of the strange literature that talked about levitation and all of those kinds of things. And I think that all came from a kind of sense of hollowness inside. We talked about that last week. Or a sense that nature isn't really good enough, that we need supernature to find something that's worth our attention. And so this story today, where Jesus goes off to pray alone, the disciples go out in a ship, they face a storm, Jesus comes to rescue them. Peter gets out on the water, starts to sink, and Jesus reaches out and saves him. That can be taken two ways. One is this religion of magic, or it can be a mystical call to go deeper into our ordinary lives until we find the unity and depth for which we seek. What happened in my case was that as much as I loved all of these stories of people who could float and do magical things, I never ran into one that could do it. And ran across a amazing person who passed away not long ago, called the Amazing Randy. And what he did was try to debunk all of these kind of psychic claims. And what really struck me was he had $1 million reward for anybody who could demonstrate kind of psychic ability. And nobody ever took it. Nobody was able to take it under scientific conditions. So, that kind of challenged me to think, okay, if people are saying that the way to understand this passage is if you have enough faith, you can walk on water, then what we need to do is take those people out to the swimming pool and have them demonstrate. And because I've never met anybody who could, then I need to take a different route, because I'm basing my life on what I hold to be true. And so wishful thinking is going to set me up for enormous pain. And it comes from a sense of hollowness, and it just comes from a fear of life itself, although we don't realize that at the time. The philosopher Bertrand Russell was somebody I ran into in school, and he wrote a book called Why I'm Not a Christian. And he argued that religion is born of fear. And so a story like this, where somebody goes out into the storm, they're terrified, and God reaches in to rescue them, is a kind of denial of what our real life experiences are. But what I discovered, again to my own amazement, is that these stories are told all over the world. And I think that's very, very important, that when Jesus turns water into wine, that was already an old story when it was told. When Jesus talks about, or when the New Testament talks about Jesus walking on water, I suspect there were people there that knew that there was an earlier story from Buddhism about walking on water, where the disciple is wanting to reach out to the Buddha. There's a flood taking place. The river is risen. So they're so in love with Buddha and wanting to be close to Buddha that they walk across the water in faith. And in fact, they start to lose faith. They start to sink and then restore their faith and go on. So what the challenge for me is thinking through what these stories would sound like if I'd already heard them in another religion. If instead of hearing these as literal historical events, if I heard them as great themes of these spiritual geniuses that are telling us personal stories to put us in touch with great themes of life. Again, the Buddhism, that Buddhist story would be a part of it, but there would also be parts of their own tradition. For example, in Psalm 69, there's a passage that says, "Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no foothold. I have come into deep water and the flood sweeps over me." See, that's not just a one-time story. That's the human condition. And I would suspect that those are the truths we need. Not just something that happened once upon a time, but something that's happening all the time. Here's another story, Isaiah, or not a story, but a theme. It goes, "Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the waters, they shall not overwhelm you." So my punchline for today, and if you want to cut off after this and watch football, I'll never know, but is not that if you have enough faith you can do magic, but that love will always find a way, right? Religion doesn't change the conditions of your life. You will pass through storms. But what this theme, this great theme from around the world, is telling us, I believe, is that we don't have to get magical powers. That if we have enough trust and openness, love will find a way of guiding us and reaching us. Which doesn't mean bad things aren't going to happen to us, but that there is a way of living sort of above the storm, through the storm. And it comes from remembering the deeper parts of who we are. In the story, what you don't notice in the Christian version is that Peter does what the church says is the right thing to do. It's like, throw yourself on Jesus. You can't save yourself. Throw yourself on Jesus. And Peter does that, and Jesus says something very interesting. He says, "Where is your faith?" Right? So what salvation means is not this fear-based remedy to some kind of threat. It's an affirmation that is deep inside of us. And in the Buddhist story, it's even clearer because at one point, one of the disciples says, "I walked across water to get here." And Buddha says, "Well, you were able to float across the water. A leaf can do that. Or if you're able to soar into the sky, a fly can do that." Another place, somebody says, "I walked across water to get to you, Buddha." And Buddha says, "Was there not like a ferry, a boat that could take you across?" And the person says, "Yes." And Buddha says, "Well, how much would it have cost you?" And then the disciple says, "Well, it would have cost $1.99. And Buddha says, "Well, then that's what your miracle is worth, $1.99. These are ways of both calling us to the miraculous, but not leaving us trapped in the magical. To find the courage that we need. These stories are leading us to our own strength, to something inside of us that's already there. So I want to ask the question, what is the point of this story for your life and for my life? And obviously you have to answer that for yourself. I can't guess what you're going through. I don't know your personal experiences. But to ask the question, what is the greatest storm you will ever pass through? And probably first you'll think of things that have happened to you. You'll think of divorce, death, getting fired. Death is usually very high on the list. But I think what we keep coming back to is the greatest storm we pass through in life is time. Right? A given flood will sink some of the boats, but time will eventually sink all of the boats. And a religion of life affirms life through the change. It doesn't lift us outside the storm. It guides us through the storm. So a lot of religion about having mansions in the sky is like putting you in dry dock and saying there's a way that you can live where you'll never change. You'll be lifted up into heaven and you'll stop changing. Well, in an evolving universe, that's not really good news. and your body knows better than that. In the story, they look out and they see Jesus walking on the water. And it says they thought he was a ghost. Phantasm is the word that's used there. When you think about it, being undead is the scariest thing there is. How many horror movies are based on that, where people come back from the dead? And it's terrifying. To be frozen eternally in time would not be heaven. That would be like the wax museum. I don't know about you, but it's like there's nothing freakier than seeing a perfect replica of a human being. And the only thing missing is the essence of what you love. There's something creepy about that idea of permanence in a permanently evolving universe. So religion should lead us, again, as we saw last week, to a leap of faith into life, not away from life. And a story like this takes us by the hand, and we should recognize the truth of the story in our own life situation. This isn't just a story that happened one time with Jesus. This is a story that you and I are going through right now with all of the challenges that we're facing. I ran across a quote this week on Facebook that I really liked. It said, "Courage is knowing it might hurt and doing it anyway. Stupidity is the same. That is why life is hard." Let me say that again. Courage is knowing it might hurt and doing it anyway. Stupidity is the same. That is why life is hard. In these stories, the reason we need this kind of poetry to remind us is that life is just so hard, and sometimes we do it wrong. So in the story, when Jesus says, "Do not fear, it is I," in my opinion, that's the divine name, the I am. And again, it's reminding us of our own source. That when Jesus uses the I am, it's not saying just that he is God, it's saying we're all expressions of some deep cosmic creativity. It may be a being that gives us birth, or it may be being itself. And in some ways, it doesn't matter. We are born out of this creativity. We die back into that creativity. And in the meantime, we can trust that creativity. In the gospel story, Jesus goes out in the desert to be tempted. We heard that story. Turns bread into enough for an entire crowd. And then we see the storm that happens on the sea. We could see those as three magic tricks that Jesus does. But there's a theme there that goes deeper. And I've heard the story, you may have heard Love Can Build a Bridge by the Judds. And Naomi Judd had been diagnosed with hepatitis C. She thought she had a couple more years to live. And she wanted to write a song to her family, to her fans, to everybody who they've never really necessarily reconciled everything. But see if this isn't very similar to the story. Out in the desert, turning bread into enough for people, and then walking on water. I'd gladly walk across the desert with no shoes upon my feet to share with you the last bite of the bread I had to eat. I would swim out to save you in your sea of broken dreams. When all your hopes are sinking, let me show you what love means. Love can build a bridge between your heart and mine. Love can build a bridge. Don't you think it's time? Don't you think it's time? Poems touch us at a level that I think is why stories are told and why they reoccur all over the world. They're personal stories about universal themes, so we can feel those universal themes in our personal life. It's such a gift. But again, the point is not that if you have enough faith, you can do magic tricks and escape what you fear. The truth of these poems is much deeper. That whatever the terrifying storm you're passing through, love can find a way. Love can make that connection. If you've never seen the YouTube of the ballerina with Alzheimer's, type those 2 words into YouTube. There's a very powerful little clip of a ballerina who is now elderly. She has, it looks like dementia, if I understand correctly. She has Alzheimer's. And they put headphones on and play Swan Lake. I think that's what it is. I'm not real good at classical music. But a very powerful song, and you see the movement rippling through her body. And they show a clip of a ballerina doing that, and you realize what this woman is doing with her body. That even though she may not be able to think about this thing, that music is moving through her body. And I think that's what the poetry is trying to give us. Because we're not just going to die, we're going to dissolve. Right? The idea of this permanent being that steps outside of time, I think is very frightening to most people. But the idea that we come out of a creativity that's either divine or cosmic, we die back into that cosmic song, and in the meantime, we can trust that cosmic song. That's not a religion that's based on fear, the way Bertrand Russell thought it was, but it was a call through our fear into a love that guides us through it and tells us to focus on what we love, not what we fear. We come from creativity, we die back into creativity, and in the meantime, we can trust that divine or cosmic creativity. In the gospel story, Jesus goes out in the desert, then he feeds a multitude, then he walks on water. He wasn't teaching us magic tricks. It's a love poem. And I don't think it could be said better than in this beautiful poem that Naomi Judd wrote. I'd gladly walk across the desert with no shoes upon my feet to share with you the last bite of the bread I had to eat. I would swim out to save you in your sea of broken dreams. When all your hopes are sinking, let me show you what love means. Love can build a bridge between your heart and mine. Love can build a bridge. Don't you think it's time? Don't you think it's time? Well, I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.